Tom Waverly believed he'd left the rule-heavy chaos of city life behind, until a bright orange vehicle violation sticker greeted him on a quiet October morning. The paper clung to the windshield like a scarlet letter, curling slightly at the edges from the dew. He squinted, lips pressed tight, as he read the bold black letters. Notice of Non-Compliant Vehicle, HOA Ordinance 3.2b. A fine print paragraph beneath it threatened fines if the unauthorized vehicle wasn't removed from sight within 72 hours. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Tom folded the paper with slow precision and tucked it into the pocket of his flannel shirt. The sun was just rising over the tree line, bathing his modest 1-acre property in warm, golden light. Fallen leaves crackled underfoot as he walked back toward the porch where his coffee waited. A carved pumpkin sat beside the steps, and 2 neat bags of leaves leaned against the trash bin near the mailbox. Everything about his home was tidy, peaceful. At Dottie's diner earlier that week, Mildred Harper had warned him. While pouring half and half into her coffee, she'd whispered across the booth, "Karen's been cracking down. First it was flower beds, now it's driveways." Tom had chuckled politely and changed the subject. But now, looking down at the violation sticker, the memory settled uncomfortably in his gut. He stepped inside and flipped on the radio. Soft jazz filled the kitchen as he buttered a slice of toast. No anger yet, just mild curiosity. His truck, an old forest green Ford with a few scratches and a cracked side mirror, had been parked in the same gravel spot since he'd moved in 3 years ago. It was registered, insured, and didn't leak oil. In fact, it hadn't moved because he only used it for trips to the market or hardware store. After finishing breakfast, he walked the property line, inspecting his small fall garden. The squash vines were hanging on a bit longer than expected, and the last tomatoes were stubbornly green. The air smelled of dry leaves and chimney smoke. Somewhere down the road, someone was burning a brush pile. Later that morning, Tom drove into town for his usual visit to Dottie's. The diner was warm, filled with the familiar scent of bacon and overbrewed coffee. The bell above the door jingled, and Dottie greeted him with a nod. "Morning, Tom. Usual seat?" "Sure." He settled into his spot by the window, the one that gave a clear view of Main Street and the town's single traffic light. Around him, quiet conversation filled the room. 2 tables over, Bob Ferguson muttered, "Got a letter from the HOA last week. Said my camper was too visually disruptive." Mildred, seated beside him, clucked her tongue. Tom didn't interrupt, but his ears were open. Karen Whitmore wasn't at the diner, but her name hung in the air like a draft. As president of the Pleasant Hills HOA, she was polite in public, always with a smile and a firm handshake, but neighbors whispered about her behind napkins. Overly particular, always watching, always citing rules no one remembered approving. When he got back home, Tom pulled out a manila folder from his filing cabinet labeled HOA Docs, Maple Glen. Inside were the printed bylaws, last updated in 2019. He flipped to Section 3.2b. The wording was vague. Non-compliant vehicles must not be visible from the street. No definition of non-compliant. No photos. Just Karen's interpretation, apparently. That evening, after dinner, Tom sat on his porch with a blanket across his lap and a mug of cider in his hand. The porch light cast a soft yellow halo across the gravel driveway. The air had cooled, and the sound of crickets blended with the rustle of dry leaves. He noticed movement at the far end of the drive. A figure, mostly in shadow, held up a phone. The screen glowed faintly. As she turned toward the street lamp, he recognized the neat blonde bob, the pressed jacket. Karen. He stood slowly, careful not to startle. The boards of the porch creaked under his boots as he approached. "Evening," he said, voice even. Karen lowered her phone with a practiced smile. "Just keeping things in line. Some folks forget this isn't the Wild West." She turned without another word, her heels tapping confidently along the sidewalk. Tom didn't follow. He just stood there a moment longer, hands in his pockets, watching her retreat toward her perfectly trimmed lawn. Tom watched her walk away, then mutters, "You just towed the wrong man's line," and pulls out his old enforcement handbook. Tom returned from the farmer's market with apples and sweet corn, only to find his pickup gone. The empty space in the gravel driveway looked almost surgical. No skid marks, no broken glass, just the slight indentations where the tires had rested for years. Tom stood still, one grocery bag in each hand. A pair of apples rolled to the ground and came to rest against the porch step. The air was unusually still for early October, a thin sheet of cloud muting the sun. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once, then went silent. He exhaled through his nose, placed the bags gently on the porch, and walked back to where the truck had been. The ground felt different underfoot. He could see the faint lines of where the gravel had been shifted, a wide arc like something had been reversed and hauled. There was no note, no warning, no neighbor in sight. He didn't curse, he didn't shout. He simply walked inside, sat down at the kitchen table, and picked up the phone. "Sheriff's office," came a woman's voice. "Afternoon. This is Tom Waverly. My pickup was removed from my driveway sometime this morning. I'd like to file a report." There was a pause, followed by the sound of typing. "Mr. Waverly, it looks like we had a call logged from your address. Vehicle was reported by the HOA for violation, marked as towed, not stolen." Tom blinked once. "Towed by who?" "Private contractor. Towing order signed by the Homeowners Association. We didn't dispatch." "I see," he said. "Thanks." He hung up and stared at the kitchen wall for a full 30 seconds. The faint scent of apples and burlap still lingered in his flannel from the market. The morning had started off simple. Rows of local stalls, baskets of squash, warm cider in foam cups. He'd shaken hands, made small talk. A boy had tried to sell him pumpkin bread wrapped in wax paper. Tom had bought 2 loaves, but now everything had shifted. He grabbed his keys and drove his small sedan toward the impound lot on the edge of town. The lot sat behind a chain-link fence, tucked between a roofing supply warehouse and a discount tire shop. The gate was open, and the buzz of a fluorescent light hummed from the small office up front. Inside, the clerk looked up from her computer. She wore oversized glasses and a cardigan with cardinals stitched on the sleeves. "Help you, hun?" she asked. "Name's Waverly, Tom. My truck was brought in this morning." She nodded and typed. "Ah, yes. Green Ford pickup, right? We've got it. Tow ticket says HOA citation, signed by Karen Whitmore." Tom offered no reaction. "May I see the paperwork?" She printed a sheet and handed it over. Karen's name was right there, under a pre-checked box marked "Vehicle obstructing view of street." "I'd like to inspect the truck, please." "Sure," she said. "Far left row, Bay Uchunju." He found it easily. The old Ford sat with its front bumper just inches from a rusting Winnebago. Nothing broken, no damage. It looked like it had simply been moved from one quiet place to another. Back home, Tom pulled up the porch security camera feed. The timestamp read 9:14 a.m. He watched Karen walk briskly into the frame, followed by a tow truck. She gestured with a sharp, sweeping motion toward the truck, then stood with arms crossed as the driver hooked it up. He didn't speak. She didn't smile. She just nodded once, turned, and left. Tom paused the video and took a still frame. He printed it out and slipped it into a folder marked Incident, October 9th. He moved with a kind of calm that only years of dealing with petty infractions and larger egos could build. There was no panic, only precision. By sundown, the folder contained printed bylaws, annotated paragraphs, a copy of the tow form, and 3 stills from the camera footage. Then he opened his laptop and searched the Tennessee Department of Transportation's public code on vehicle removal and private property jurisdiction. He scrolled slowly, highlighting key lines. A tab in his browser was already open to the Maple Glen HOA website. He clicked into the Rules and Regulations section and noticed the revision date. Updated just 3 weeks ago. No community vote, no resident acknowledgement. He cross-checked the HOA's prior version. He had a printed copy from when he moved in. The clause allowing external towing had been added recently, tucked into a block of general language, vague enough to be missed. At sunset, he drove back to the impound lot to return the completed release form. Edna, the clerk, was still at the desk. "Back already?" she asked, half smiling. "I have footage," he said, placing a USB stick on the counter. "You might want to see who signed that tow request." She hesitated, then plugged it in. The video played silently, Karen gesturing, standing arms crossed, overseeing the whole thing. "That's not legal?" Edna whispered. Tom didn't answer. He retrieved the USB, nodded politely, and walked out into the evening air. Tom types a message to Jim. "Need a quick check on towing authority. Might be crossing state line here." A missing truck was just the beginning. Tom soon realized he wasn't the only one. The wind had picked up overnight, scattering leaves across his porch and piling them in swirling eddies near the shed. By morning, Tom had already swept them twice. Not out of habit, but because the rhythm helped him think. His living room had transformed into a quiet storm of open files, printouts, and legal notepads. The coffee table was covered with color-coded folders. A legal pad rested beside his mug, its pages scribbled with HOA clauses and handwritten dates. He tapped a pen against the edge of the pad, eyes drifting toward the window. Mildred's words came back to him, weeks ago over biscuits and jam. Poor Bob lost his camper last month. Just disappeared. He hadn't thought much of it then. Bob had always been a bit scattered. But now the timing seemed too convenient. By mid-morning, Tom was knocking on Bob Ferguson's screen door. Bob answered in a red flannel shirt and khaki suspenders, blinking like someone who didn't often get visitors. "Tom," he said, surprised. "Everything all right?" "Just looking to chat. Got a minute?" Inside, Bob led him to a recliner. The living room smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and lemonwood polish. A faded photo of Bob and his late wife sat on the mantel beside a dusty cuckoo clock. Tom cut to the chase. "You mentioned your camper went missing," Bob grunted. "Yeah, whole damn thing. Parked it along the side like I always do. One day, gone." "Any warning?" "Nope. Just a note 2 days later from the HOA. Said it violated street view standards. Said I should have known better." He scratched his head. "But I never even saw a notice." "Did you ask where they towed it?" Bob nodded slowly. "Lot off Route 12. Same one you went to, I bet. Place felt off." Tom stayed for another 10 minutes, asking quiet, pointed questions. Bob confirmed no prior warning, no signature required, no HOA vote announced beforehand. When Tom left, he noted the date of the camper's removal. It matched a weekend when Karen had supposedly been on vacation. Back home, he slid the notes into a new folder labeled Bob, Case Number 2. He sat at his kitchen table, opened his laptop, and created a spreadsheet. Columns: resident, vehicle type, date removed, notice given, follow-up. He began filling rows with what little he knew: his own truck, Bob's camper, and 2 others Mildred had casually mentioned in the past month. That afternoon, Mildred dropped by with a casserole dish and an overstuffed manila envelope. "I thought you might want these," she said. "I've been on the HOA mailing list since it started. I never throw anything away." Tom smiled, took the dish, and cleared a spot on the table. The envelope was heavy with newsletters, community notices, and original copies of meeting agendas going back 5 years. "You're a lifesaver," he said. I just believe in keeping records. Karen's the kind that counts on folks forgetting things." For the next 2 hours, Tom combed through the stack. His fingers moved with quiet precision, highlighting paragraphs, jotting notes. Something caught his eye in a newsletter from last spring, a sentence buried mid-paragraph about revised authority to ensure neighborhood compliance via third-party service partners. It sounded innocuous until he realized there had been no signature sheet attached to the following month's minutes. He opened his own copy of the HOA bylaws, the version from when he moved in. The clause about external towing didn't exist. In the revised version from 3 weeks ago, the clause had appeared. But nowhere in the documents was there proof of a community vote. No quorum. No amendment signatures. As evening fell, Tom put on a sweater and headed to the Townhouse BBQ on Main. The place was busy for a weeknight, the smell of hickory and brisket thick in the air. He sat at the counter, ordered a pulled pork plate, and nursed a sweet tea while scanning the room. The waitress, a blonde in her early 20s with a silver nose stud, slid his plate over. "You live up on Ashwood?" she asked. He nodded. "My uncle runs the tow yard. Said they've been getting a bunch of cars lately from your neighborhood." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Yeah," she continued, unaware of his interest. "He says Karen sends them like clockwork, some deal they have. Calls it easy money." Tom kept his face still. "You don't say." "Yeah, he says it's weird, like real specific about what to take and when. But she pays up front. Cash sometimes." He nodded politely and changed the subject. But the words settled in his mind like the last puzzle piece falling into place. That night, under the soft hum of his desk lamp, Tom laid out the timeline on paper. He used a ruler and a red pen to mark vehicle removals, newsletter dates, and when Karen had last announced HOA updates. The patterns weren't just suspicious, they were coordinated. He opened the bylaws one more time and reread the clause about bylaw revisions. It required a signed quorum of at least 60% of property owners to pass any major change. He flipped through the HOA meeting minutes. None of them showed attendance over 40%. Not one. With steady fingers, Tom opened his laptop, created a new folder on his desktop, and named it Maple Glen HOA, Evidence for State Review. A folded HOA flyer arrived in Tom's mailbox. Emergency meeting. Attendance strongly encouraged. It was printed on pale yellow paper, the kind that crumpled too easily, and bore the HOA's letterhead in sharp serif font. Tom read it twice, eyes narrowing. No agenda listed, no rationale provided. Just a location, Maple Glen Community Hall, and a time, Saturday evening at 6. Beneath it, a bold line, "Preserving the integrity of our neighborhood together." He stood there on the porch for a moment, the October breeze brushing past his collar. Distant wind chimes clinked softly, and the smell of burning firewood drifted in from someone's chimney. The neighborhood was quiet, too quiet, and Karen's last words from a week ago echoed in his mind. Some people need reminding about our community values. Tom didn't need reminding. He needed witnesses. By the time Saturday rolled around, the sky had turned a cool gray, and the wind carried hints of frost. The community hall sat across from the post office, a squat brick building with white trim and faded bunting still clinging to its porch from the summer fair. Pumpkin displays framed the entrance, and the scent of hot apple cider wafted from folding tables inside. Neighbors arrived in a slow trickle, some with hands in pockets, others clasping thermoses or plates of cookies. Tom arrived just before 6, dressed in a wool blazer, his evidence folder tucked neatly under his arm. Inside, the lights were warm but flickered ever so slightly, giving the room a hazy glow. The wooden floor creaked under every footstep, amplifying the quiet tension in the room. Folding chairs had been arranged in rows, and a makeshift podium stood at the front beside a projector and a pull-down screen. Karen stood behind the podium, greeting people with a polished smile and firm handshake. Her pearl necklace caught the light as she turned toward the group. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, tapping her notes into alignment. "It's come to the board's attention that there's been some confusion, perhaps even misinformation, circulating about our enforcement procedures." Her tone was smooth, rehearsed. She spoke of unity, standards, property value. Her words flowed like syrup, heavy and slow. Every so often she glanced toward Tom. "Unfortunately," she continued, "certain individuals have chosen to interpret our bylaws selectively and sow distrust in our processes. That ends tonight." A few heads turned. Murmurs passed between neighbors. Tom stayed seated, calm, hands resting gently on his folder. When Karen finished, she stepped back and opened the floor for comments. The silence hung for a beat too long. Then Tom stood. He walked to the front with unhurried steps, nodded once to Karen, and turned to face the room. "My name's Tom Waverly," he began. "Some of you know me. Some just wave when I walk to the diner. That's fine. I moved here 3 years ago because I wanted peace and space. I didn't expect to become a legal analyst." A soft chuckle rippled through the room. He set the folder on the table and opened it. "What I'd like to share with you tonight are facts, not interpretations, not rumors, just what's on paper. You can decide for yourselves what they mean." Tom clicked a remote, and the projector blinked to life. The screen lit up with a still frame. Karen, arms crossed, a tow truck backing into his drive. "On October 9th, this was my truck, parked in my driveway. The HOA claimed it was in violation. No warning, no vote, towed under a rule that didn't exist in the original bylaws." He clicked again, audio this time. Karen's voice unmistakable. "Go ahead, hook it." A rustle of unease moved through the chairs. "I cross-referenced the HOA's official minutes for the past 12 months, Tom continued. "Not once did they meet quorum to amend towing policies. And yet, changes were made." From the back row, someone whispered, "That's not right." Tom held up a printed contract. "This document shows who authorized the towing service. The signature here is Karen Whitmore's." Karen stepped forward, face tight. "You're out of line, Mr. Waverly. This isn't a courtroom." "No," he replied evenly, "but it might become one." She opened her mouth again, but Tom held up one last page. "And this contract?" he said quietly. "The tow yard's registered owner is Thomas L. Raines, same last name as Karen's cousin, same address as the tow lot, same bank routing on file." A wave of noise rippled through the room, gasps, murmurs, questions overlapping. Someone stood up in the back. Dottie, clutching a styrofoam cup of cider, looked straight at Karen. "I think we've heard enough." Karen fumbled with her papers, then shoved them into her tote. She turned without another word, brushing past Tom and nearly knocking over the cider table. Karen storms out, muttering, "You'll regret this." The crowd stays behind, watching her leave in stunned silence. Jim's voice on the phone was calm but clear. "We're opening a formal inquiry. You'll be called as a key witness." Tom stood at his kitchen counter, one hand wrapped around a mug of black coffee, the other holding the phone. Outside, the early light filtered through amber leaves, still clinging to the maples. He listened without interrupting, then nodded once, though Jim couldn't see it. "Understood," Tom said simply. "Send me the time and address." That evening, he packed a slim leather briefcase with the same care he once used when loading a citation book on his patrol routes. Nothing about his expression hinted at nerves, only quiet readiness. He laid out the folder labeled Maple Glen HOA, evidence for state review, double-checked his notes, and slid everything into place. He even polished his shoes. When October 23rd arrived, the sky over Nashville was cloudless and sharp, the kind that promised a cold front by evening. The civic courthouse loomed over the sidewalk, its limestone facade polished to a shine. Inside, marble floors echoed with footsteps, and a low buzz filled the lobby as attorneys, clerks, and reporters circled like slow-moving bees. Tom arrived early. He passed through security without a word, showed his witness badge, and entered a waiting room where Jim was already seated at a long table. Jim didn't rise, but offered a half smile. "You always were early," he said, flipping a file closed. "Old habit." They went over the documents one last time: timestamps, notarized statements, printed screenshots, HOA newsletters marked up in yellow highlighter. Everything had been cross-referenced, itemized, labeled with evidence tags. "You sure you're ready for cross-examination?" Jim asked. Tom glanced at the briefcase. "I've been ready since they took my truck." At 10 sharp, they were called into courtroom 2B rows of oak pews stretched behind the bar, filled now with residents from Maple Glen and a few curious members of the press. A court reporter typed softly at the front. The judge, a man in his 60s with silver hair and a no-nonsense expression, called the session to order. Karen sat at the defense table in a navy suit, her posture rigid. A younger man beside her, her attorney, whispered something, and she gave the slightest nod. Her expression was neutral, but her fingers tightened around a legal pad until her knuckles showed white. The first to testify was Bob Ferguson. He shuffled to the witness stand with notes clutched in one hand and recounted how his camper vanished without warning. Mildred followed, testifying about newsletters that never made it into public view, changes no one remembered voting on. Photos were passed from hand to hand, towing notices, video stills, copies of the HOA's revised bylaws. When Tom took the stand, he greeted the court with a quiet, "Good morning," then laid out his case like someone used to making reports, not speeches. "The clause allowing for external towing was not present in the HOA documentation I received when I moved to Maple Glen," he said. "Its sudden inclusion coincides directly with a spike in vehicle removals and community complaints. There is no record of a formal vote, no signed quorum, and no public notice preceding the changes." Karen's lawyer stood. "Mr. Waverly, you're not an attorney, correct?" "No," Tom replied. "But I spent 30 years enforcing municipal parking laws. I know the difference between due process and strong-arming." The lawyer tried again. "Isn't it true you have a personal grievance in this matter? Your truck was towed." Tom nodded. "That's true. And in looking into why, I found that others had been similarly targeted. My grievance became a concern for fairness." The judge listened, eyes steady, lips pursed. The room was quiet except for the hum of overhead lights and the soft clack of the court reporter's keyboard. Then came the final witness. The tow yard employee was in his late 20s, hair pulled into a short ponytail, clearly nervous. He held a folded paper in his hand as he took the stand. I work for Rains Towing," he began, voice low. "Been there about a year. Miss Whitmore came to us about 5 months ago. Said she needed fast removals. No delays, no questions." He swallowed hard. "She paid in cash sometimes. Told my boss, we called him Uncle Tom, that the more cars we hooked, the better. They agreed to split a kickback. We got 50 per car, sometimes more." The lawyer objected, citing hearsay. The judge allowed the statement to stand. The room shifted, shoulders leaned forward. A ripple of unease crept through the crowd. "And this Uncle Tom, he runs the yard?" the judge asked. "Yes, sir. Thomas Rains, Miss Whitmore's cousin." That was when Tom stood again. He walked to the evidence table, retrieved one last folder, and handed it to Jim. Inside were printed HOA meeting minutes, handwritten notes, attendance tallies, signatures, or lack thereof. Jim presented them with a clean summary. Your Honor, none of these records show a quorum of more than 40%. No meeting qualifies for a legal bylaw amendment. These towing policies were never lawfully adopted. The judge leaned back, his eyebrows arched. He didn't speak for a long moment. All right, he finally said. I'll be reviewing this over the next few days. This hearing is adjourned for deliberation. Gavels down. Conversations rose. Outside, Karen moved swiftly through the courthouse doors. Reporters flanked her from both sides, microphones extended. She didn't stop. Her heels clicked on the marble, her face pale, jaw set. Judge closes the session for deliberation. Outside, reporters rush Karen. She pushes past them, silent and pale. 2 weeks later, the town gathered again, but this time for pie and peace, not policy. The crisp November air carried the scent of grilled turkey and cinnamon, drifting between red and gold leaves, still clinging to the oak trees that lined the new community space. What had once been the HOA's small, windowless office, where notices were drafted and fines debated, was now gone. In its place, picnic tables and fire pits dotted the freshly raked lawn of what a hand-painted sign now called Maple Freedom Garden. A banner stretched between 2 trees read, "Welcome back, neighbors." Tom Waverly stood near the cider table, one hand wrapped around a warm paper cup, the other resting in his coat pocket. Children ran between hay bales. A Bluetooth speaker played old bluegrass tunes, and somewhere nearby, someone was handing out caramel apples with checkered napkins. He spotted Dottie near the grill, arguing with a younger man about the proper way to slice brisket. She caught Tom's eye and beamed, waving him over. "You dodged the microphone once already," she said, handing him a plate with a fat slice of apple pie. "You're not getting away again." "I'm just here for the pie," he said, smiling. "You're here because this town owes you quiet and gratitude," she replied. Then, clinking a spoon against her cider mug, she raised her voice above the music. "All right, y'all, before we dig into round 3 of turkey, I'd like to say something." A soft hush fell over the lawn. Neighbors turned from their plates. Laughter settled into stillness. Not long ago, we were all dodging fines and checking our mailboxes like they were bear traps. Today, we eat together, not because someone told us to, but because we chose to. She gestured to Tom. And if it weren't for this man over here reminding us that rules are supposed to serve people, not control them, we'd still be paying $30 for parking our own cars. There were cheers, some laughs, and a warm round of applause. Tom shifted, uncomfortable in the center of attention. "Speech," someone called. He raised a hand gently. "No speech, but I will say this. If you need help reviewing parking suggestions, I'll take bribes in the form of apple pie." More laughter, and just like that, the attention moved on. Tom stepped back into the shade of a hickory tree, watching the scene unfold. He saw Mildred talking with Bob, both smiling like people who hadn't truly relaxed in years. He saw kids climbing on hay bales where a no-playing sign used to hang. He saw the community he'd hoped for when he first moved to Maple Glen, finally taking shape without the rigid frame of bylaws and violations. Karen was nowhere to be seen. Officially, she'd been removed, fined, and barred from any leadership roles within the county for a minimum of 5 years. Her lawyer had called it a regrettable lapse in oversight. Tom called it closure. He wandered past the dessert table, where a couple of teenagers were debating whether pecan or pumpkin was the superior pie. The music changed to a slower fiddle tune. A group of elderly neighbors had pulled chairs into a semicircle, sharing stories about the town's early days, back when no one had heard of an HOA and neighbors settled things with coffee, not citations. As dusk settled, lanterns strung along tree branches flickered on, casting soft light over the crowd. A small fire pit was lit near the center, and someone passed around marshmallows and skewers. Tom took a seat at the edge of a table, sipping cider and watching as the night unfolded, without structure, without a meeting agenda, just community. A man he didn't recognize approached, holding a paper plate and wearing a Maple Glen visitor badge. "Nice place you've got here," the man said. "Just moved in last week. Name's Greg." "Welcome," Tom said, shaking his hand. Greg looked around, eyes scanning the crowd, then the firelight, then the garden. "So, is this place HOA free forever?" Tom smiled, shrugged, and said, "As long as folks remember we're neighbors, not wardens." The new guy laughs, but glances at a clipboard and a measuring tape in his back pocket. As the smoke from the barbecue faded into the autumn sky, Maple Glen felt lighter, as if the weight of rules without reason had finally lifted. What began with a single sticker became a reminder that even quiet voices can stand firm against misused power. When neighbors choose courage over silence, fences fall and bridges grow, because in the end, it's not just land we protect, it's the spirit of looking out for one another, porch to porch, season after season.